everybody. This is Dr. Martin, and I'm here with James Junkin, and this is
Roll
our
Tide.
second Roll Tide, and this is our second episode of the Risk Matrix videocast.
The Risk
And
Matrix.
the Risk Matrix, and we're going to talk to you today about SIFs and problems in safety management systems that James in particular has found interesting in his last few audits and his accidents investigations. Let's get started here. We had a good first episode. And like I said earlier, we're going to talk today about some of the things that you've been doing in the field in your professional practice and how they really relate to reducing SIFs. And so I'm gonna pass it over to you, and I want you to tell me a little bit about what you've been doing and how those things kind of tie into this SIF problem that we have.
Well, I probably have done more fatality and serious injury investigations in the last 2 years than I've done in the previous 10 years. And it's become a very disturbing part of our practice. While I like helping companies identify causal factors and put corrective actions in place, these are reactive actions after someone has been seriously injured or someone has been killed, which is personally depressing for me because, like most safety professionals, our mission is the same as Veriforce. Let's get workers home safe from jobs. No one goes to work to be seriously injured. No one goes to work to die. And what I found is there's a commonality in the investigations I'm doing, along with some of the field audits that I'm doing. And when I say field audits, I mean comprehensive audits of someone's safety management system that doesn't just include a facility inspection. It's a deep dive assessment into a contractor or to a company's safety management system, where we're examining their written programs and we're looking at implementation of those written programs, and we look at their training and we look at their hazard assessments and their risk assessments and how all that works together in feedback loops and communication, corrective action tracking in a proactive manner and in a reactive manner in response to incidents. And what I found, and I bet you found this in your practice too, Dr. Martin, is there are some common threads.
Sure are.
Okay, that continue to repeat themselves, where I could almost just take the name of the organization out and put another name of another organization in there. And the very first thing I'd like to discuss with you, and maybe our audience could use this as some thought-provoking and brainstorming activities on their end, is hazards are still not being assessed, identified, and risk determined in the planning stage of the work. Hazards are being assessed when they get to the field.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate there for a second. I think hazards aren't being assessed in the field either. Okay, hazards in the pre-planning, yes, right. We all should be pre-planning jobs, especially in a construction or a heavy industry like oil and gas. We should be talking about what's going to happen, how these policies and procedures relate to the field work. Are the employees trained? Are they aware? But then we get to the field, and it's hurry up and get the job done. Okay, right. Hurry up and get the job done. And there are points to note. And we talked about this before we started taping. There are points to note about things that aren't happening in the field as well, or are happening and are basically putting up barriers for workers to accomplish their job in a safe manner. So I'll let you riff on that for a little bit. But I just want to add in that yes, pre-planning, yes, management, yes, workers. But when we go to the job and we say, let's just get her done, which I've said this before, when we say get her done, it jumbles up everything.
So usually what I've found here recently is most organizations have some form of job safety analysis or job hazard analysis in the field. Mm-hmm. Many times these are poorly written and they reach only the surface hazards, slip, trips, and falls. Is that important? Yes, it's important. But that's probably not the only hazard that we have on the job site. And certainly if we're performing lockout tagout, we should be thinking about all the different energy sources. We should be thinking about the work environment that we're working in. But it's almost depressing to note that many times almost exclusively. None of these hazards have been examined prior to someone coming to the job. So what I'd like to see is a recommitment by our safety professionals that are out there to put a process in place that seeks to identify hazards and assess risk when we're planning the work, so that we have proper controls in place. It's too late once we get to the job most times to think about engineering controls, to think about administrative controls. At this point, it's just PPE as a control, right? But even in that respect, what I'm finding is we're not even getting the most obvious hazards on some of the job safety analysis. So that goes back to the second thing that I find pretty common is most organizations have a set of written policies and procedures. And you know, at Mariner Golf, we write about 10,000 of these a year.
And JHAs. Okay. So I'm gonna take off on your JHA thing, because I've seen in the field, you go into the field and they've got a book of JHAs, and they're task specific. And I don't know if you've seen this, I'm pretty sure you probably have, where they list a bunch of like random things at the top, like, and I'm not opposed to this, but slip, trip, and fall, and ladder safety, and stop work, and heat, and varmints, and right, you're trying to cover everything. And I've seen this a lot on like government jobs where they kind of make you build out these JHAs to kind of get everything. And a lot of the really important stuff gets lost in this drive to try to write everything down, right? CYA, write everything down. And so you get 2 pages of all this stuff, which I'm going to say some of it is common sense, but let's cover it anyway. And then we forget to cover the hazards in detail. We forget to really look at the hazards and really think about, how do these hazards relate to the site I'm on right now? Right? Because you can have electrical safety. And you can say, don't touch live wires and don't pull the switch and whatever you're going to put in there. But how does this relate to the job I'm doing today, the point of task, and this site, and what's going on around me, right? JHA, a book of JHAs does nothing, right? Because I've seen people on site walk onto a site. I've seen a safety manager or a field superintendent just say, sign, go over there, read the safety stuff, sign it, and let's get going, right? And they might cover a JHA, but it's not specific to the work.
Same. I mean, a JHA to me should be the last in a long line of risk management, risk assessment, hazard identification tools that an organization uses in order to protect its workforce. It could also be a process in which we find ingenuity on how to do a job better. But too many times, our training's not being translated to the JHAs. I don't know if we're conducting enough training on hazard identification and risk assessments, but I'm not seeing it in the field. Field. So if we're leaving hazard identification and risk assessment to workers only, we're really being deficient. And I would say that we're, in some cases, not fulfilling our responsibilities as safety professionals and as managers to help identify those hazards and put proper controls in place. I mean, we got all these tools that are out there, risk matrices, things that we can utilize that are not very complicated to do, to sit down and think about severity and probability and in the planning of the work. Do we have the hazards identified? Do we have all these things controlled? What's the risk? What's the likelihood? So when we get to the field, I see exactly what you're saying. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but okay, we've got the hazard is varmints. Watch out for varmints. Well, certainly I don't want to get bit by a rabid coon. Okay, James, don't get bit by a rabid
or
coon.
Scorpion,
or scorpion, or one of those snakes. I hate snakes, all forms of snakes, But by the same time, while that's on the JSA or JHA, we missed all the hazards related to lockout tagout. We just got one thing: perform lockout tagout,
or operation of forklifts.
Absolutely.
Or hazards related, and I know I've said this 3 times already, at least, hazards related to the job you're on right now.
Right then.
Because I don't, you might
Right
do
then.
that same task every day at a different job site, but every job site is different. Every suite of jobs that are going on at a job site is different. The people are different. The equipment is different. So the JHA has to cover all that. And if it doesn't, then you got a problem.
And
So
don't and don't forget simultaneous operations with some other contractor you've never worked with before, or some other organization may not have the same training or values. Poor communication in those type of situations, have conflicting jobs. You know, I'm over here doing a line break while these people are doing hot work right next to me, and there could potentially hazardous atmosphere involved and combustibles and all this type of stuff. That needs to take place in the planning of the work.
yeah.
So poor communication, bad JHAs, poor risk
Bad
assessment.
supervision, bad supervision,
Well, it all
right?
comes back to bad management, does it not?
Bad management. Yep. And I will say this, right? So there's probably a lot of safety professionals that are listening to this, hopefully. And they're saying, I can't be Dr. Martin and James, I can't be everywhere at once, right? I got 50 job sites and I've got 8 people working for me, and we're doing our best. And I'm going to go back to something I said on the podcast. I have if you want safety to be easy and not stressful, and you don't have to think, then you can do it that way. But you are going to have injuries and SIFs and accidents and things like that, because you aren't taking your safety management system and meshing it with all the other things that you need to mesh it with, right? And that's just not like 45,001. Look, I've got everything 45,001 says. I have all the paperwork in place. I have all the training in place. I'm keeping an eye on the job sites. I'm looking at the differences between what this crew is doing, what that crew is doing. And it's all kind of coming together in a safety management mesh. Okay.
Right.
It's not a tier of safety management. It's not a level of safety management. It's not a component of safety management, because once we start talking about components, then we have a problem, right? We start taking those components and making them separate pieces, which cannot be done. It has to be meshed together.
I agree 1000%. What you're really talking about is organizational safety, which is another topic related to safety culture, right? That we're working on, but a holistic approach to safety. And what I've seen is isolation safety. We have written programs that are over here. We have our hazard identification system that's over here, right? There's no rhyme or reason between it.
They're not interconnected the way that they should be.
There's no interconnectivity. So you may have training, but is it the right training? Is it effective training? And that's probably I guess I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. The second part of this is the written programs I've kind of mentioned. These written programs are written in isolation, meant to satisfy some third-party verification system, and they're not really being implemented in the field. So they're not doing what they say they're doing. Just about every assessment that I've conducted here in the last 2 years, that's been a common finding, very common finding. And in the investigations I've done, we find that we're not following our written programs, whether it comes to hazard identification, risk assessment, or things we should be doing in the field, right? Then we get to training. And when I do find organizations that are training beyond the safety fundamentals level, and we know what I mean by safety fundamentals level, the orientation level, the awareness level, right?
The computer-based training that's just skim the surface. HAZCOM is one of the big ones, right? Just take that on the computer. It's going to take you an hour or two. You're all set, right? You know how to read an SDS. You know how to look at the hazards. I haven't heard of one person that's really helped that kind of training. That's generalized. You need specific.
You need particularly related to HAZCOM. HAZCOM is one of the most often cited violations of OSHA regulations, and for a reason. The generalized training lets me know what HAZCOM is, but it doesn't tell me about the physical and health hazards of the chemicals that I'm using. And what I found many, many times, right, we're checking the box. We've got an SDS booklet. For example, in the last few assessments I've done in the field, we have safety data sheets. They're all in English, but all of our workers are Hispanic and none of them can read the safety data sheet. Therefore, the safety data sheet is useless. We have it, we've
Mhm.
checked the box, but when we go to implementation side, we're deficient, right? We're not giving workers what they need, the tools necessary to do their jobs and get home safely. So
The
support necessary, right? We've got it. We've checked the box. They've sat through some computer-based training. And I'm not going to say all computer-based training is ineffective, but let's understand the limitations of computer-based training and move beyond checking the box, right?
Yep.
And then this part I'd like to spend some time on with you. Commonality in the trends that I see in serious injuries and fatalities and in findings in current assessments. The incident investigation process prior to this was grossly deficient. Grossly deficient. Investigations almost exclusively blame the worker for human error, and the corrective action is almost exclusively retraining without ever
Agree.
getting into the other causal factors. So I would say, shooting from the dark, you know what they say about statistics, right? So this is just some made up statistics based on my experience. I'd have to go back and do some analysis to get good statistics, but based on
I'll trust you.
Right? I'd say over 60% of the time, the precursor for the finding or the precursor for the serious injury or fatality that I'm investigating was discovered months ago, sometimes years ago. And corrective actions were put in place, but they were never followed up on. They said, we're going to do this, but we never got to it. Or we did this for a little while, and then we stopped doing it.
Or we put it in writing, but we didn't tell the workers.
Exactly. Exactly. So those are some things that I've come across just here recently that safety professionals should look for. Right? It's also obvious after we have an incident. It becomes completely obvious after I do an assessment of an organization's safety management system. We start digging in and tearing things apart and say, okay, you said here you're going to do this. Let's follow it on through.
Right.
Have a process. Have a process. Think about, okay, this is my written program. Where's the training for it? And where's the implementation? This safety stuff is hard.
Yep.
It's not
And
easy.
are they saying, are they doing what we say they're doing?
A lot of times they're in conflict. I've seen that recently, where our written program says we're doing one thing, but our training says we're doing something else.
And then what we're doing in the field is something completely different.
Completely different. Completely different.
Which, by the way, I don't have a problem with workers. You use the word ingenuity, right? Taking initiative and making the job safer or more efficient or more productive, right? But if we're going to allow that in the workers, which I believe we should, that's just an opinion, then we need to be present for those changes or modifications, be verifying that they are safe, and involving them in changing the written programs and JHAs and processes, right? Which again goes back to pre-planning. It also goes back to when they're on site. How do they do it? What is the process for them doing that on site? And how do they get that approved so that it becomes part of the organizational culture?
And I'd like to add something to this on behalf of fellow practicing safety professionals. You cannot do this by yourself. You cannot do this by yourself. It has to be a team approach. In the oil and gas industry, in the best scenarios, we see maybe 2 safety professionals per 100 workers.
Yep.
Outside of oil and gas in construction, this pretty much true in construction as well, based on my experience, maybe a little more, 1 or 2 different safety professionals. But even in best cases, we're talking about 4 safety professionals per 100 workers. In a recent assessment I did, we had 8,000 employees and 2 safety professionals. Spread
And
out
how
in the United States.
often were they on site?
As much as they could be. But they're constantly on the road. They're constantly going. They're basically doing site inspections. There's no
Right.
time to be able to think about work, to assist in growing the organism that is the safety management system. The safety management system is not static, it's dynamic.
Right.
It's either growing or regressing. Things are changing. There are influences on it, not to mention available resources, and resources meaning an ever-changing workforce, financial resources, management resources. So in order to accomplish our mission of getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs, you need a team approach. Can 2 safety professionals manage a safety management system with over 8,000 workers spread out across multiple states? They can, if their operations team is committed. And safety is part of the culture of the entire organization and not something that sits in isolation. If safety is only what these 2 people do, you're never going to accomplish your mission of getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs. And
so I just want to
injury statistics.
I just want to, sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to clarify. You're not saying safety culture. Okay.
No.
You're saying safety is part of the organizational culture.
Yes.
Okay, because we're on the same page with that. Some people, and we'll get to this on another episode, but there's a difference between people saying safety culture and organizational culture, and you and I both believe there's no such thing as safety culture, right?
Right.
Because the organism is the organization and not safety in a vacuum.
I guess that's a great way to put it, Dr. Martin. Safety in a vacuum. If safety's in a vacuum and it's apart from the other parts of the organization, it's always going to be reactive. It's always going to be reactive. Now, I want to close with this one thing. And I live in the contractor world, but I also work with some hiring clients, but more contractors. The mentality of many contractors is they look to their hiring client to tell them everything they need to do to operate for them and on a given site. They will look to them for example, PPE requirements. They look to them for work instructions. They look for them for specific controls.
Yep.
Brothers,
they set the bar.
They set the bar. But brothers and sisters, you are responsible for your employees 100% of the time. If the hiring client doesn't tell you to have on certain PPE, and that PPE is part of what your control to protect your workers from a given hazard, then you need to put them in that PPE. You need to do the hazard identification and risk assessments. You need to do the training. I wish I had $1 for every time somebody told me, well, my hiring client did not tell me I needed to train my people on fall protection. I'm like, no, but that
OSHA tells you that.
The law. And there are a lot of OSHA regulations I don't always agree with, but it's the law. Until they elect James, benevolent dictator. I'm running in 2024, by the way. James, campaign slogan, if some stuff's going to change, right? Appreciate your vote. But until we get to that point, we're still responsible for obeying the law. We have to identify the hazards. We have to put the controls in place. We have to determine what training is required. We have to have written programs that live beyond the third-party verification system to be actually the foundation of our safety management system. So look inward, not outward. Understand the requirements from the hiring client are a baseline. You're responsible for your employees. If the facility doesn't have an eye wash station, guess what? If you're working there, you need some type of eye wash for your contract. Yep. If they don't properly come up with what needs to be done in lockout, tagout, you need to do it. You need to do it. And it's floored me in the last 6 months how many people don't understand that. And that is a contributing factor to these shifts that we're seeing in the industry.
Well, I think a lot of people have fallen prey to, look, I've checked all the boxes, I've met the bar, I'm good to go. And I'll just tag on to your comment there about complying with the regulations in OSHA. You're not only responsible for complying with those regulations, you're responsible for how you comply with those regulations, right? And so just because OSHA doesn't say XYZ and you know it's the right thing to do and it'll make the job safer and it's cost effective and it doesn't limit productivity, you should be doing that too. Because, there's also intent of the law that is included with the law, right? And the
Right.
intent of the law is to keep workers coming home safe from all jobs. So I don't know if that's a good wrap up point, but I think we've generated a lot of different topics for follow-on episodes. I'm having fun with this. I always like to chat
Me
with
too.
you. So this has been the second episode of the Risk Matrix, and James and I will be back hopefully for a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 10th episode, and so on. But James, thanks for joining me as the co-host of this great budding program.
It's always great to talk to you. We think alike on a lot of things, but we have different approaches on way to solve problems. And really, I hope that's the purpose of this video cast. Let's get the conversation going. Let's start thinking outside the box. Let's get some brainstorming amongst the profession and see what we can do to help bring these workers home safe from high hazard jobs, all jobs.
And all jobs. And if you're watching this video cast, go down below and click follow on the YouTube link on our link here, and certainly put in comments. We love comments. You might find yourself as a guest if you disagree with us, because we always like a little bit of banter. But thanks for listening to the Risk Matrix.